What happens when Hollywood's most charming smartmouth meets daytime television's most outspoken personality, and neither one is willing to back down? The answer is television gold that nobody saw coming. A clash so intense it left producers scrambling and audiences picking sides. Before we dive into this explosive encounter, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because trust me, you're going to want to share your thoughts on this one. It was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance. Ryan Reynolds, fresh off another blockbuster success, was making the rounds to promote his latest project. The View seemed like the perfect platform, a safe space where celebrities could chat about their work, share a few laughs, and connect with daytime audiences. But from the moment Reynolds stepped onto that familiar set, something felt different. The energy was charged, electric in a way that made everyone slightly uncomfortable. Whoopi Goldberg sat at the head of the table, her usual confident demeanor amplified by something else, something that seemed almost predatory. As Reynolds settled into his chair, flashing that trademark smile that had charmed millions, Whoopi's eyes narrowed slightly. She had clearly done her homework, and it wasn't the kind of research that leads to softball questions. "So, Ryan," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that unmistakable tone that every celebrity learns to fear. "You've built quite the career on being the funny guy, the irreverent one who says what others won't. But some people are saying that maybe it's time to grow up. Maybe it's time to use that platform for something more serious." Reynolds, still maintaining his easy smile, tilted his head slightly. "Well, Whoopi, I appreciate the feedback, but I think entertainment has its place. People need to laugh, especially these days. If I can provide that escape, that moment of joy, I think that's pretty valuable." "Escape," Whoopi repeated, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "That's an interesting word choice. Some might say it's more like avoidance. While real issues are happening in the world, while people are struggling, you're making jokes about it. You're profiting from people's need to, as you put it, escape reality." The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the usual gentle ribbing or playful banter that characterized most celebrity interviews. This felt personal, targeted in a way that made everyone on set nervous. Reynolds, however, seemed unfazed, though his smile had tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think you're oversimplifying things," Reynolds replied. His voice still measured, but with a slight edge creeping in. "Comedy has always been a way for people to process difficult times. It's not about avoiding reality. It's about finding a way to cope with it. And honestly, I think that's more valuable than lecturing people about what they should and shouldn't find funny." Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. "Lecturing? Is that what you think this is? I'm trying to have a real conversation about responsibility, about using your influence for good instead of just for profit. And I'm trying to explain that making people laugh is using my influence for good." Reynolds shot back, his composure starting to crack slightly. "Not everything has to be a political statement or a social justice lecture. Sometimes people just need to smile. And if that's what I can give them, then I'm proud of that." The tension in the studio was palpable. Now, camera operators were adjusting their angles, sensing that something significant was happening. The other hosts, Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, and the rest, looked like deer caught in headlights, unsure whether to jump in or let this play out. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice dropping to that dangerous register that anyone who had worked with her knew meant trouble. "You know what I think, Ryan? I think you hide behind humor because you're afraid to take a real stand on anything. It's easy to make jokes. It's harder to actually care about something enough to risk your precious image." Reynolds' smile finally disappeared completely. "That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of being angry on television. You want to talk about hiding behind something? You hide behind outrage because it's easier than actually engaging with different perspectives." "Outrage?" Whoopi's voice rose sharply. "I'm passionate about issues that matter. I use this platform to shine a light on injustice, to give voice to the voiceless. What do? You make jokes about everything and stand for nothing." "I stand for the idea that people don't need to be preached to every second of every day," Reynolds replied, his own voice rising to match hers. "I stand for the idea that joy and laughter are just as important as anger and activism. And I stand for the idea that maybe, just maybe, not every conversation needs to be a battle." The studio fell silent except for the low hum of cameras and equipment. Everyone could feel that they had crossed a line, that this had moved beyond professional disagreement into something much more personal and volatile. Whoopi's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "You know what your problem is, Ryan? You're privileged and you're comfortable, and you don't want to be challenged. You want to keep making your little jokes and collecting your paychecks while the world burns around you. Reynolds stood up slowly, his hands pressed flat against the table. And you know what your problem is, Whoopi? You've forgotten that people who disagree with you aren't automatically evil or stupid. You've become so convinced of your own righteousness that you can't even have a conversation without turning it into an interrogation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Producers were frantically gesturing from behind cameras, but both Reynolds and Whoopi were locked in their confrontation, neither willing to back down. The other hosts sat frozen, realizing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. I think, Whoopi said slowly, her voice deadly quiet, that you need to check your privilege before you come on this show and dismiss the real work that real people are doing to make this world better. Reynolds laughed, but there was no humor in it. There it is, the privilege card. Because anyone who doesn't agree with your worldview must be privileged and out of touch. It couldn't possibly be that I just have a different perspective on how to contribute to society. Different perspective? Whoopi's voice was rising again. Your perspective is that everything is a joke. That nothing matters enough to take seriously. That's not a perspective. That's cowardice. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Reynolds' jaw tightened, and for a moment, everyone in the studio held their breath. This was the moment that would define everything that came next. Reynolds' eyes narrowed to slits, and when he spoke, his voice was ice cold. Cowardice. You want to talk about cowardice? Let's talk about how you shut down anyone who doesn't echo your exact opinions. Let's talk about how you've created an environment where your co-hosts are afraid to disagree with you. That's not courage, Whoopi. That's bullying. The other hosts exchanged alarmed glances. Joy Behar opened her mouth as if to intervene, but Whoopi cut her off with a sharp gesture. Don't you dare, Whoopi snapped, her attention still locked on Reynolds. Don't you dare come onto my show and accuse me of bullying when you've spent your entire career making light of serious issues. Your show? Reynolds repeated, his eyebrows shooting up. Last I checked, this was called The View, not The Whoopi Show. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe you've forgotten that other people are supposed to have voices here, too. The comment hit its mark. Whoopi's face flushed with anger, and she leaned forward aggressively. I have given more people a voice on this show than you ever will in your entire career. I have fought for representation, for justice, for change. What have you done besides make people laugh at inappropriate times? Inappropriate times? Reynolds' voice rose incredulously. Who decides what's appropriate? You. Are you the arbiter of when people are allowed to find joy in their lives? Because that sounds an awful lot like the kind of control you claim to be fighting against. Sarah Haynes finally found her voice, trying desperately to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Maybe we should talk about Ryan's upcoming project, the reason he's here today. No, Whoopi interrupted sharply, never taking her eyes off Reynolds. I want to finish this conversation. I want to understand how someone can be so disconnected from the real world that they think making jokes is equivalent to making a difference. Reynolds laughed bitterly. Disconnected from the real world. I interact with real people every day. I see how much they appreciate having something to smile about. But you sit up here in your ivory tower, surrounded by people who agree with everything you say, and you think you know what's best for everyone. Ivory tower? Whoopi's voice reached a dangerous pitch. I came from nothing. I worked for everything I have. I earned my place here by speaking truth to power, not by pandering to people who want to avoid reality. And there it is again, Reynolds said, standing up and pacing slightly. Anyone who doesn't share your definition of truth is pandering or avoiding reality. You've become so wrapped up in your own narrative that you can't see how toxic you've become. The word toxic landed like a bomb in the studio. Whoopi's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that suggested she was barely containing her fury. Toxic? You think I'm toxic for caring about justice? For using my platform to fight for what's right? I think you're toxic for believing that your way is the only way, Reynolds replied, his voice steady despite the charged atmosphere. I think you're toxic for attacking anyone who dares to suggest that maybe, just maybe, there's room for different approaches to helping people. Joy Behar finally managed to interject. Ryan, I think maybe we should. No, Joy. Whoopi cut her off again, more harshly this time. Let him finish. Let him explain how someone who makes millions pretending to be other people thinks he understands the real world better than those of us who actually engage with it. Reynolds stopped pacing and turned to face Whoopi directly. You want to know what I think? I think you've become exactly what you claim to fight against. You've become an authoritarian who demands conformity. You've created a space where dissent is not just discouraged, it's attacked. And you've convinced yourself that it's noble because you're fighting for the right causes. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. The other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Camera operators were getting signals from producers who were frantically trying to decide whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial. Whoopi's voice dropped to a whisper, which somehow made it more menacing. You have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea what it's like to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. You have no idea what it's like to use your voice for something that matters. And you have no idea what it's like to bring joy to people without expecting them to agree with your politics first. Reynolds shot back. You have no idea what it's like to respect people enough to let them think for themselves instead of telling them what they should believe. Respect. Whoopi's voice was rising again. You think it's respectful to make jokes while people are suffering? You think it's respectful to profit from people's pain? I think it's respectful to acknowledge that people are complex enough to handle both laughter and serious issues, Reynolds replied. I think it's respectful to trust that they don't need you to tell them when they're allowed to smile. Whoopi slammed her hand on the table, causing everyone to jump. That's enough. You clearly don't understand what this show is about, what I'm about, or what actually matters in this world. What I understand, Reynolds said, his voice growing louder to match her energy, is that you've appointed yourself the judge of what matters and what doesn't. You've decided that your version of activism is the only valid one, and anyone who disagrees is either ignorant or malicious. Because some things are more important than your ego. Whoopi shouted back. Some things are more important than your comfort, your jokes, your need to be liked by everyone. My ego. Reynolds' voice cracked with incredulity. This entire conversation has been about your ego. Your need to be right. Your need to control the narrative. Your need to make sure everyone knows how much more enlightened you are than the rest of us. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Whoopi's face was now a mask of pure rage. And when she spoke, her voice was trembling with fury. Get out. Excuse me? Reynolds said, though. He had clearly heard her. I said get out, Whoopi repeated, her voice growing stronger. If you can't handle a real conversation about real issues, if you can't handle being challenged on your privilege and your avoidance, then you don't belong here. Reynolds stared at her for a long moment, and everyone in the studio could see the exact moment when his famous composure finally snapped completely. You know what, Whoopi? You're absolutely right. I don't belong here. I don't belong in a place where having a different opinion makes you the enemy. I don't belong in a place where conversation is just a prelude to condemnation. He started to remove his microphone, his movements sharp and deliberate. I came here to talk about a movie, to have a conversation, maybe share a few laughs, but you turned it into an inquisition because you can't stand the fact that not everyone worships at the altar of your righteousness. That's right. Run away, Whoopi called after him, her voice dripping with disdain. Run back to your comfortable bubble where no one challenges you to think about anything deeper than your next punchline. Reynolds paused in his microphone removal and turned back to face her one last time. I'm not running away, Whoopi. I'm choosing not to participate in your performance, because that's all this is to you, isn't it? A performance where you get to play the righteous crusader, and everyone else gets to play the villain or the audience. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point, and everyone knew that whatever happened next would be impossible to take back. Whoopi's face contorted with rage at being called performative. Performance? You think fighting for justice is a performance? You think standing up for what's right is an act? That's exactly the kind of privileged thinking that allows people like you to dismiss real activism as theater. Reynolds finished removing his microphone and placed it carefully on the table, his movements deliberate and controlled. No, Whoopi. What I think is that you've confused aggression with activism. You've confused shutting people down with lifting people up. And you've confused being loud with being right. I'm loud because I have to be, Whoopi shot back, rising from her chair to face him. I'm loud because people like you would rather we whisper about injustice so you don't have to hear it. I'm loud because comfortable people like you need to be uncomfortable sometimes. People like me, Reynolds repeated, shaking his head. You don't know anything about me, Whoopi. You don't know what I believe, what I've been through, or what I care about. But you've decided that because I don't express it the way you do, it doesn't count. The other hosts sat frozen, realizing they were witnessing a complete breakdown of professional decorum. Joy Behar looked like she was about to cry. Sarah Haynes was staring at the table, clearly wishing she could disappear. The producers behind the cameras were making frantic gestures, but neither Reynolds nor Whoopi was paying attention to anything except their confrontation. "I know enough," Whoopi said, her voice cold and cutting. "I know that you've built a career on being the likable guy who never takes a real stand. I know that you've made millions while avoiding anything that might be controversial. I know that you represent everything that's wrong with celebrity culture." Reynolds let out a laugh that was pure frustration. "And I know that you've become a bully who hides behind social justice to justify treating people terribly. I know that you've created an environment where your own colleagues are afraid to disagree with you. I know that you've forgotten the difference between passion and cruelty." Cruelty. Whoopi's voice reached a pitch that made everyone wince. "You want to talk about cruelty? Cruelty is staying silent when people are suffering. Cruelty is making jokes about serious issues. Cruelty is having a platform and using it for nothing but self-promotion. Cruelty," Reynolds said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet, "is ambushing someone who came here in good faith. Cruelty is turning what should have been a conversation into an interrogation. Cruelty is believing that your pain gives you the right to inflict pain on others." The words hit Whoopi like a physical blow. For a moment, her mask of righteous anger slipped, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. But it was only for a second before the fury returned, stronger than ever. "Don't you dare," she said, pointing a finger at him. "Don't you dare turn this around on me. I didn't ambush you. I challenged you. I asked you to think beyond your own comfort zone, and you couldn't handle it." "You didn't challenge me," Reynolds replied, gathering his things. "You attacked me. From the moment I sat down, you decided I was the enemy, and nothing I could have said would have changed your mind. This was never about challenging ideas. This was about you needing to prove how much more righteous you are than everyone else." Whoopi moved around the table, getting closer to him. "You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I did decide you were the enemy. Because people like you are the enemy. People who have everything and do nothing with it except make themselves more popular." "There it is," Reynolds said, stopping his packing and turning to face her fully. "The truth. You don't want a conversation. You don't want understanding. You don't even want change. You want enemies. You need someone to be wrong so you can be right. You need someone to attack so you can feel powerful. I need people to care." Whoopi shouted, her composure completely gone now. "I need people to use their privilege for something other than their own benefit. I need people to stop hiding behind humor and start facing reality." "And what if my reality is different from yours?" Reynolds asked, his voice rising to match hers. "What if helping people laugh through difficult times is my way of making the world better? What if not everything has to be a battle to be meaningful? Because laughter doesn't change laws." Whoopi screamed back. "Laughter doesn't fix systemic racism. Laughter doesn't help people who are actually suffering. It just helps comfortable people feel better about not doing anything to help. And anger doesn't change hearts," Reynolds shot back just as loudly. "Anger doesn't build bridges. Anger doesn't create understanding. It just makes people like you feel superior while driving everyone else away." The studio fell into a stunned silence. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, transfixed by the raw emotion on display. The other hosts looked like they were witnessing a car crash, unable to look away, but horrified by what they were seeing. Whoopi's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than her shouting. "Get out of here. Get out of here before I say something I'll regret." Reynolds stared at her for a long moment, and everyone could see the exact moment when his anger transformed into something that looked almost like pity. "You know what, Whoopi? I actually feel sorry for you. You've become so consumed with being angry that you've forgotten how to be happy. You've become so focused on fighting enemies that you've forgotten how to make friends." "I don't need your pity," Whoopi said through gritted teeth. "Maybe not," Reynolds replied, picking up his jacket. "But you need something because this isn't working. This isn't helping anyone. This isn't making the world better. It's just making you feel powerful." He started walking toward the exit, but Whoopi called after him one final time. "That's right. Walk away. Just like everyone else who can't handle the truth." Reynolds stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one last time. "The truth. The truth is that you've become everything you claim to fight against. You've become someone who silences opposition, who demands conformity, who believes that your way is the only way. The truth is that you've forgotten that the people you disagree with are still people." With that, he walked off the set, leaving behind a studio full of shocked faces and an atmosphere so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. Whoopi stood alone at the center of the set, her chest heaving with anger and exhaustion, while her co-hosts stared at her with expressions that ranged from concern to barely concealed disapproval. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath, every uncomfortable glance, every moment of stunned silence. This was television history in the making, the kind of unscripted drama that would be dissected and analyzed for years to come. But more than that, it was a moment that revealed something fundamental about the nature of discourse in our current cultural moment. It showed what happens when passion becomes aggression, when righteousness becomes cruelty, and when the desire to be right becomes more important than the desire to be understood. What did you think about this explosive confrontation? Did Ryan Reynolds handle the situation correctly, or should he have stayed to continue the debate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that dive deep into the moments that define our culture. This is the kind of raw, unfiltered content that reminds us why live television will always be unpredictable and why sometimes the most revealing moments happen when people forget the cameras are rolling.